But the mistake that I made, which I'm determined not to repeat again, was treating that 5-year plan like it was a sprint rather than a marathon. You cannot sprint for 5 years. It's absolutely impossible. It was an interesting journey to attain something that you want and then find out that actually you could have everything that you kind of dreamed of, and actually it's a nightmare to live day to day.
Everything is changing right now. How we live, how we work, how we lead. And if you're a leader, you're probably feeling it. The uncertainty, the pressure, maybe even the exhaustion. I'm Richard Stokes, and this is Mojo Under Fire. This podcast is about those defining moments, the leadership crucibles that either break leaders or forge them into the kind of magnetic forces others actually want to follow. When the old playbook stops working, when you realise you can't work any harder, when something has to change, and that something is you. For the last 5 years, I've been having hundreds of conversations about how people find and keep their mojo, that quality that makes you successful, energetic, influential. But lately, these conversations have gone deeper because the challenges are bigger and the stakes are higher. So, in this series, you're going to hear real stories from real leaders about their hardest moments and how they came through them. Not just what happened, but the truth of what it felt like, the approaches that actually worked, and the wisdom they'd share with you if you were sitting across the table from them right now. These are conversations that will give you something you can use, a different way of thinking about your own challenges, tools you can apply, perspective that might shift how you lead. Because the best leadership development doesn't come from theory. It comes from learning how someone else navigated the fire and came out even stronger. Today's guest is Oli Johnson. Oli is a 3-time founder, exited entrepreneur, and the creator of PrescribeLife.AI, an AI-driven health tech solution helping leadership and performance coaches to help their clients stay healthy and high-performing. With 2 decades of experience in technology within investment banking in London, before launching and scaling multiple ventures, Oli brings his own perspective of the high-pressure world of leadership, success, and sustainable performance. Having personally dealt with the intense demands of both corporate and startup life, culminating in his own experience of burnout, he has made it his mission to solve a problem he once faced. How do you stay at the top of your game without sacrificing your health? Now living in Ibiza, Oli balances running his latest venture with a slower, more intentional lifestyle. Proof that high performance doesn't have to come at the expense of well-being. This is a conversation worth your time. And if it lands with you, please do share it with another leader who might need to hear it. Okay, let's dive in. Oli Johnson, welcome to the Mojo podcast. Great to see you. How are you doing?
Morning, Richard. I'm doing very well, thank you. And good to be here with you. Thank you for having me on.
It's an absolute pleasure. And Oli, always start here, get a data point from you. How is your mojo today out of 10, would you say?
You've got me on a pretty good day. So I'm going to give myself a generous 8.5 for today. I'm feeling pretty good, yeah.
Love it. And so that's a pretty good day. Did you find that sometimes it will track lower or higher than that? Is that about average for you?
I'd say it's constantly in flux. Yeah, generally it's pretty good and pretty high, but certainly some days better than others. I've had a pretty intense couple of weeks actually, and I found I've been going through a couple of really good days, a couple of really challenging days, and I've been through a couple of challenging days this week already, but I'm still feeling pretty good. So but I find it's constant flux.
So it's in flux, it's in movement, and so when I say that word mojo for you, what comes to mind? How are you defining that for yourself?
It's an interesting word. It feels a little esoteric to me. It feels like a bit of a blend of things. I think obviously there's something around flow and energy and confidence, but also there's something else, maybe something around sort of almost like charisma or something too, you know, how you're feeling. You know, there's days when you feel really good, not just confidence and energy, but sometimes you just feel a little bit plus. And that to me, if, you know, mojo was at 10, that would be, you know, one of those days, which we all love to have, right? But, you know, it's how do you have them more frequently, I guess is the question.
Yeah. So if mojo was a 10 for you, what would be going on?
My mental state would just be, it would be top of the world, basically. You'd feel like you can do anything. That feeling of doesn't matter what the challenge is, anything could happen, and you feel absolutely on top of it. And the reverse of that being, you know, the smallest thing can feel like a a big challenge. I mean, I'll give you a mini example from this morning. So two things went wrong in the house. I had a flood in the downstairs bathroom, nothing major, but, overflowing sinks and, a bit of an issue. Air conditioning unit broke, and I felt pretty calm and pretty chilled about it. And, it's not that big a deal because I'm feeling good, showing up, feeling fine. But on a day where I'm feeling overwhelmed and stressed and mojo is lower, then that can feel more annoying and more difficult to deal with. I know it's a very trivial example, but just to kind of bring it to life a bit.
But I think that's the important thing. It is because, it's an everyday, every moment experience. And I think in that you're choosing almost your response. On a low mojo day,
Yeah.
the flooding toilet, absolute disaster. Why is this happening to me?
Yeah,
On an
exactly.
8.5 day, it's, you know what, it's okay. I'll take care of it.
Yeah, and on a 10 day, you're like, bring it on. Yeah, let all the toilet flood. It's fine. There's
I love that.
there's no drama at all. You feel like you can, bring on the whole world. Basically, it's no problem.
The flooding toilet is a message for some reason. I need to experience it.
Yeah, I want to see the plumber. I haven't seen it for ages. I love that. Yeah,
I love it. Okay, so we've got a real good sense of, I appreciate maybe not a word you're using that often, but a sense you get on a daily basis. Now, Oli, for listeners who might not know you, can you give us, a little bit about you that would be useful for everybody to know before we kick off?
Sure, Rich. Yeah. So, full disclosure, we're friends. We've known each other. We've been here on the island a very similar amount of time. So,
yes.
Yeah, I'm a full-time Ibiza resident with a young family. Got my wife here, and I have two young daughters. One who's 6 and one who's 6 months. And I have a business background. I spent about 20 years working in the city in London in financial services, primarily in investment banking, a bit of time in private equity, asset management. And also I spent 3 years at the Bank of England, which was pretty interesting, through the Brexit years as well. So lots of fun there. So through that career, it was always within technology, primarily tech leadership roles focused on cybersecurity. Which was interesting because cybersecurity obviously has gone from a kind of back office function to something which is now absolutely front and center for not just major investment banks, but for every single business. It doesn't matter who you are. And
front page news very often, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when I started, it wasn't even a consideration. Nobody cared anything about it. So I saw a big transition over the years. But towards the latter end of those 20 years in the city, I actually formed my own cyber tech business, which I built and sold out of. So I'd done a few different entrepreneurial ventures. I had an e-commerce business. I did, various things, but that was sort of the first big venture that was, reasonably successful, I'd say. Probably not as good as perhaps I would have liked, for various reasons, which we may or may not get into on this podcast. But yeah, right. It gives you a bit of a flavor. Right now, I have another startup, a tech startup in the health tech space as well. So slightly different environment to work in, but sort of applying the knowledge that I got from my previous ventures.
There's for you leadership experience in both that corporate kind of setup. Bank of England probably doesn't get much more traditional or corporate, I guess, than that, all the way through to lean startup, scale up kind of experience, and we'll get into both that experience of the one you sold out of and your new venture, Prescribe Life, I think it's called. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, PrescribeLife.AI is the new one. And yeah, I think you've really nailed it there in terms of the variance. So certainly from a very corporate, aggressive environment, like American investment banks, it's a pretty, hair-raising environment in terms of, the leadership roles there. It's, challenging, long hours, very aggressive kind of environment to be in. Bank of England is much more academic and, sort of reverence. It's very interesting. You go into the building's absolutely incredible. You go in every day, there's, doormen in pink top hat and tails, and it's super old school. And Mark Carney was leading it at the time. Obviously now the Canadian Prime Minister. And it was interesting because it's a very different leader to the traditional British, governors of the bank that we'd had previously. So it was very different there. And then actually transitioning into the startup world, that was also fascinating. The clients we had were investment banks in the city for the cyber business. But now certainly I've got a small global team dispersed literally from, West Coast, North America, right across to the Far East of Asia. So again, it's a very different vibe having a distributed team and leading in a different way.
So right now, and you talk about your current team, remote, distributed globally. How do you show up as a leader now? How do people experience you, would you say?
I lead intentionally very differently to how I've lived before. And, if I'm being totally honest with myself, I look back at some of my previous leadership roles and not necessarily full of pride with how I've led those teams. I think now having, I'm leading the company, I'm the founder of the business, I'm able to set the tone in the way that I want to, which I didn't necessarily have the freedom to do before. And that sounds actually like I'm making a bit of an excuse when I hear myself, but it's also very much environment related. Like the environment that I developed in as a leader in financial services in the city, being surrounded by the kind of person that you're surrounded with and dealing with the kind of clients that you have to deal with, there is a certain way of showing up, and there has to be more of a hard edge, or certainly that's how it feels. And those relentless long hours potentially lead to burnout and has impact on people's health, both mental and physical. I certainly in the past have transgressed a lot of those kind of barriers or norms because I was showing up like that myself. And that's certainly something now where with my team I'm very intentional with the way I lead to make sure that I'm setting a good example. And obviously lots of respectful communication, which is always something I've been an advocate for, but I'm certainly very conscious of people's home lives, people having interests outside of work. And as much as this business is very, very important to me, and I've got a very good dedicated team, I want to make sure people have a sense of balance with what they're doing. It's it's really important to get that flow right.
So I'm hearing in that almost a redefinition of what success might mean to you in how you're showing up as a leader. From, you didn't say these words, but win at all costs in that kind of investment banking, maybe early startup piece, to now I'm hearing a much more humane. We want to succeed, we will succeed, and we'll do it in a human way. Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say. Yeah, it's fair to say. I'm trying to apply those lessons that I've learned previously. And one of the biggest mistakes I made was building a business with a 5-year plan to build, execute, and either exit or have a business that I could exit from, a sellable asset effectively. And now that's still my philosophy is that's a very sensible way to build a business. I think having a 5-year plan or having a plan whereby what the end game is. If you want to build a lifestyle business, then great, build a lifestyle business, but know what you're building. If you want to build something which is going to become a sellable asset, then you need a plan to work towards. But the mistake that I made, which I'm determined not to repeat again, was treating that 5-year plan like it was a sprint rather than a marathon. You cannot sprint for 5 years. It's absolutely impossible. And saying that now, I mean, it's obviously, intellectually, it's so obvious, but when you're living that, and I just did such a classic, founder mentality of myopically focused on building that business. And it was everything that I wanted to do. And all the other stuff fell by the wayside. And it's just not sustainable for that duration. For me, it certainly wasn't. And I think for most people, it probably won't be. Maybe there are a few exceptions, but generally, kind of madness lies that way rather than happiness. And, even if you do scrape through by the end of that 5 years, you're not probably going to be feeling too great about it.
And it certainly speaks to sort of that kind of, sort of a hustle culture of just push, push, push. And I don't know, this podcast is going to come out on International Men's Day. Okay. And I don't know, but it feels like there's something about the male founder, and there's an archetype here for sure. When you talk about that, a 5-year sprint, that perhaps that male founder, younger, less experienced than you are now, goes, yeah, I can do that. I should just keep on going. Is that kind of how your mindset was? And I know you're with others at the time. It wasn't just you founding it. There were other partners, if I'm right. So was that the kind of the cultural sense that you put on yourself?
It was exactly that. What you're describing is exactly what my mindset was. And I think it was a combination of, there was a bit of kind of gung ho attitude. There was a bit of bravado. There was naivety, definitely. Thinking, I've worked hard before. I can get through and do this. We've got this plan. We're going to do it. Probably a little bit of ego involved as well. Super keen for it to succeed. And in fairness, we had the business took off really well. We grew very, very fast, very quickly. We had some great clients. On paper, it was a very good story. With the trajectory was fantastic. And I think that kind of put fuel on the flames, because you could see the success coming and you just were hungry for more, 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 more. And, not necessarily just financial compensation, but just the whole process of building the business. There's something about it. And when you're in it as well, and, you grow quickly, all sorts of things start to creak and strain. You're trying to build your team up. There's, there's HR challenges, there's interpersonal issues, there's client issues. All of these things just emerge. And before you know it, you're running at 100 miles an hour. You don't have the infrastructure. You're trying to keep up. And it's very consuming. And there's this feeling if you can't stop, because if you stop, it's all going to fall apart. And it is fragile. It's genuinely, I think anybody who's listening, who has their own business, who's had a startup venture, the fragility of it is clear the whole way through. And, that doesn't really dissipate. So you have this driving mentality of I can't stop anything. It has to keep going. And with that, it's almost like a flywheel as well. So, you get more clients, you get more business, you get more revenue, you get bigger teams, you get more responsibilities. And then there's only, a couple of you as founders. And there's a lot of pressure for sure. And I think culturally, I don't know if I'm being a bit kinder to myself than I should be, but I think the culture has shifted somewhat over the past, this is talking 5-6 years ago. Yeah. And I think the culture has shifted a bit. Maybe it's just in my mind, but maybe it's post-COVID as well. So much burnout, so many people going through mental health challenges. I think things of that hustle culture is a little less glamorized than it was. I think there is still some glamorization. And I've got nothing per se against hustle culture. I think, if you're in that frame of mind and you want to work really hard, I think hard work is fantastic. And depending on the season of your life as well, you can have a difference. When you get a bit older, you've got a family, there are different considerations as well. So I look back and I have a different view to the one that I had previously. But yeah, what you described is how I was showing up.
And in that time when you're, working so hard, holding so much, I got this sense of really nothing can drop because it's so fragile. Were you enjoying it in this growth? Because I'm hearing a lot of growth, a lot of clients, a lot of revenue coming through, as you say, on paper, all good. Were you finding joy?
Well, no, is the honest, straight answer. And this is where I think with hindsight, it's easy to kind of have a really clear visibility of what it looked like and what it felt like. But I got myself in a situation where on paper, everything had worked out better than I could have hoped for. And it looked amazing, writing it down and looking at, oh my God, this is where I am right now. If I'd have wound the clock back by 5 years or a few years and said, okay, this is what's in your future. This is read this. This is where you're going to be. You're going to have this great business. You're going to have, 30 people working for you. You're going to have these great clients. There's going to hit these revenue targets way ahead of plan. And, my personal compensation from it, I would have been absolutely over the moon. It would have seemed like my dreams coming true, effectively. The reality of living it day to day was absolutely miserable. It was genuinely some of the worst times I've had in my life. And yeah, just thinking back on it now, there were a few things that they were warning signals that eventually got me to a point where I was like, I have to change my situation. And despite the fact that I had this, the build plan and everything to go with it, there are a few things that happened. And, one was probably the first thing that really got my attention was we had a sort of big step up in revenue, and that had a big uptick for me in sort of personal compensation. And a few years before, I'm commercially minded. I wasn't doing cybersecurity because it's the big love of my life, or, I'm desperate to protect investment bank shareholder value. I was obviously doing it for commercial purposes. So, having a big uptick in income, normally that would have been a big reward by itself. It would have really, it would have fired me up and, oh my God, we've had the best month ever. This is amazing. And we had this month, and it barely registered as a blip on my radar. I just, like, it was a shrug. It just made no difference to me whatsoever. And it wasn't because I was so wealthy, like that wouldn't touch the side. It was materially, a big deal, but it just no flicker of emotion for me at all. I thought, oh, that's really strange. I'm kind of, something inside me is not right here. I'm doing all this work. I'm talking like 80, 90-hour weeks back to back, barely seeing my family,
Wow.
just constant pressure, 10, 12 hours of Zoom calls a day, like really in the maelstrom. And the financial compensation was the big thing, and the big target at the end of selling the business. So to have that recognition of things going well, but to feel just completely dead to it, that really set my alarm bells off. And then things got progressively worse after that. It was I was on a downhill slide. Things happened in the business. There was a lot of tension. There were a lot of things that were very, very challenging. And the one particular incident I remember was I was traveling back to London, and I had about 5 days of meetings booked. So I had shareholder meetings. We had founder meetings, board meetings, client meetings. I was doing some filming as well for some content, and it just had an awful lot on my plate, and I felt completely overwhelmed and really in just a horrible mental space. It was terrible, and just left my nice house in Ibiza and my beautiful young family. And I remember being on this flight to London and looking out the window and just thinking, do you know what? I just, like, if this plane crashed, I actually am not sure I would care right now. Not feeling like actively suicidal, but just feeling so numb and so overwhelmed and so unhappy that I had that kind of thought. And that was, if the previous one was the amber warning light, that was the red light for me of like, wow, something is drastically wrong. You've got all this, everything that you purported to want, and I've been working hard for, and it's just horrible. It's just a horrible way to live. So yeah, it was an interesting journey to attain something that you want, and then find out that actually you could have everything that you kind of dreamed of, and actually it's a nightmare to live day to day. And I've actually spoken to a lot of people, Richard, after this, because I became super curious. After I went through that myself, I spoke to a lot of entrepreneurs and founders and people in those leadership positions, and I found out it's not that uncommon to go through that. And I think with culture these days, so much social media, there's so many people, posting on LinkedIn, and there's always this front that is put out there of, this is this lifestyle I'm living, and isn't this amazing? And I think the reality for so many people is different, and it's very easy to kind of build yourself a gilded cage.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing, that story, your perspective, and the learnings from it as well, Oli, because that's what, again, referencing people listening. I think that's the gold in here is hearing someone talk very honestly, openly about their experience, and really we might call something of a crisis point. You say, amber light, red light, something's got to shift. So what did happen?
Yeah.
If this is the crisis, was there a turning point shortly after this? Did it take a while to put something different into place?
It was pretty fast, actually. Yeah, there was a series of events that happened, and but we had some real significant internal challenge within the business. There were some co-founder issues that we were working through, and it was very, very challenging to work through. So things got significantly worse before they got better, and then what really shifted it was I took a week off. I went to Mallorca with the family, and it was the first time I'd had any time off in about 2 years. And I mean, no exaggeration, like it was 80, 90-hour weeks of just relentless, like Monday to Friday. You start at 6, you finish at 9, 10 in the evening. I work on Saturday mornings. I work on Sunday night. So we'd done that for so long, and I was so overwhelmed. It was a really horrible feeling. And taking that time off, I think it might have been 10 days or so. We went to Mallorca, and again, because things had got pretty bad, I was just like, right, laptop. Didn't even take my laptop, which was unthinkable before that. And, put my phone away and just completely disconnected, and had that family connection time. And it was having that space away from living in that maelstrom of, Zoom calls, business meetings, just stress, relentless stress, basically, and able to sleep a bit, able to connect, with the family, connect back to myself, and just to feel something, just to feel something that wasn't just continual work, basically. And it just, I had this epiphany moment of, I cannot do this anymore. And why am I doing this? Like, it's so painful. I'm like, I don't need to do this. This isn't. No one's got a gun to my head. This is something that I am doing, and I don't have to do it anymore. And yeah, that was the start of quite a long process, but of a sort of an orchestrated exit. And it was the best thing that I could have done because within time, it wasn't the 5-year plan that I had in mind, but it was good, it was worthwhile, and it basically brought me back my sanity and perspective. And it was that having that mental space to be able to make the decision was the key thing for me.
We're in that, as you say, the 80, 90-hour weeks, working so hard beyond any kind of stretch zone. We're in some kind of constant stress zone, or the zone of delusion, as I call it, because you're so blinkered to what's going on, what your body can actually do. And that act of, say, slowing down and then, now I can make some choices. Because I guess when you're in it, the opportunity, the cognitive opportunity to even make choice, to make decisions is not even there. And so there you are in Mallorca just going, okay, life without a laptop.
It's the first time it actually occurred to me that I had a choice. I hadn't even considered that. I was like, no, this is my life. This is what I'm doing. There's no way, I've got this plan. I'm executing against the plan. And don't get me wrong. I think, having grit and determination and resilience as a founder, as a leader of any description is super important. But equally as important is realizing the situation you're in. And if something is untenable and unsustainable and putting you in that kind of situation, you can't do that in perpetuity. You have to look out at what is happening. And, my relationships were suffering. My wife was super concerned about me. I was barely spending time with my young daughter, and daughter was like 2 at the time. And something had to change. And you're right that, I just genuinely didn't think I had a choice until I had that space to have some clarity. And it was only that enabled me to do so.
Yeah. And you mentioned your wife in there. Were that often around this sort of point, I ask people around, were there people who came to help and support, whether they were asked by you or they just intervened and said, Oli, you need to do something? Did that happen for you?
Yeah, I mean, there were various states of intervention and outside advice. I remember actually on the trip I was referring to, where I was on the plane and not feeling my best, not really got my mojo with me at that particular time. And I met my sister and one of my closest friends. I think it was the afternoon that I landed after work. I had about an hour or so to meet them briefly in the city. And I mean, my sister just looked at me and said, Jesus, like, what has happened to you? And I'd lost so much weight. I was barely eating. I was barely sleeping. Like big black eyes. I looked so stressed and so unwell. And when you see really familiar people, like my sister and a best friend, and both of them just looked at me and like, wow, what has happened to you? And that was a bit of a wake up call as well. I mean, it wasn't an intervention, but again, it made me realize like quite how bad things were getting. But yeah, beyond that, there were various things. Definitely, my wife actually married to a medical doctor and a psychiatrist, so it's kind of helpful in a way. I was getting some live feedback on my mental state, which is interesting. And she was genuinely really worried about me. There were times when I was just I was just a shadow of myself. I was literally just doing what I needed to do. I felt genuinely broken. And interestingly, during the whole process, I had 2 professionals who were kind of by my side to a degree. I had a therapist for quite a few years, and she stayed with me through the business build. And I'd see her once a week on a Wednesday. And prior to this business build, I'd spent quite a bit of time with her, probably a couple of years of therapy, quite intense, and done a lot of root cause stuff, really got to the root of quite a few issues that I'd had over my life. And I was used to making, really solid, deep progress. And then when I was in this business build phase, all of that kind of stopped. And I remember having these conversations with her saying, what's going on? We can't seem to get to any depth to this, these discussions. I'm not really getting the same benefit as I was before. And I mean, in the end, she was just like almost laughing at me, because I'd see her on a Wednesday in the middle of the afternoon. And by that stage, I would have done 8 hours of Zoom calls. I'd be back to back her in between client calls. And then I'll be on another, 6-7 hours after those calls. So I'd see her in the middle of, a sort of 14-hour day, 15-hour day, and then be saying to her, why aren't we making any progress? And, it's again, the space, the clarity that's needed to actually have some introspection and some reflection and some insight into how you're showing up. So that was interesting. And she became almost an advisor, really, certainly helping me manage the relationship part of my business, understanding what was going on, just trying to make sense of all the chaos around me. And so that was one element. And then another professional, I had a kind of combination of a mentor and a coach. And this person was really interesting, a very successful business person who'd effectively already been on the journey that we were executing. Right. So, had a lot of faith and a lot of trust in him. And just, he was telling us repeatedly and specifically, definitely to me, that, I'm on the path to burnout. And again, I just didn't listen. It was that combination of, no, I got my head down, I'm going to do this. And I really just basically ignored the advice. So it wasn't that I didn't have people around me helping me or trying to help me, but I didn't pay enough attention.
So these are, I said, in this business build phase, there are people around you, they're showing concern, you're not really tuning into it at this phase. And as you said, Mojo is down. There's not a lot of joy going on. And, and we have these kind of crises.
Mojo was non-existent at that stage.
Non-existent Mojo at that point.
Mojo.
Post the break in Mallorca and then sort of coming out of the business, was there anything else that you did that was different to make a change, to really turn this around? Because I'm getting a sense you're getting cognizant around, I've got to make change now. What else were you able to do?
Yeah, well, the big thing was just obviously then orchestrating how to exit the situation. So that took a while, but the big thing for me was when I managed to do that, and it took a while. It was probably a good year until I managed to do so. But just the mindset shift was the first thing, like going from, oh my God, I'm stuck in this prison that I built for myself, to, oh no, there's a pathway to freedom. I just need to pick my way through it. That in itself was so liberating, and I felt so much better just from taking the control of the situation rather than feeling like powerless. I'm on this journey and I've got no choice. So having that choice back was pivotal for my mental well-being. And then actually, post exit, I was fully burnt out. I've got to say, physically and mentally, I was absolutely drained. I felt dreadful. And then really it was straight into a proper recovery process. And, I was lucky, obviously, with, having an exit, I was able to, I had a financial cushion. I was able to take the time and recover properly. So I did a couple of things over a period of time. I mean, I took almost a solid year off, and I did a few things. The first thing was, I would equate this to like a hard reset, literally like pressing the on-off button, for a few seconds on a computer. And I did a 10-day silent meditation retreat of Vipassana, which was like straight from all these calls, all this madness. And when I was, again, just deep in the maelstrom, I had this fantasy in my mind of, I just want to go and live in an ashram. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to see any technology. I don't want any communications. I never want to be on a Zoom call again. So as soon as I had the opportunity, I did this Vipassana. And, for anyone who's familiar, it's 10 days, complete silence, no communication. You don't even have any gestures, eye contact, nothing, obviously no technology, no speaking, and you're just with yourself for 10 days. And during that time, each day starts at 4:30 a.m. You do 10 hours of meditation a day. You just sit on a cushion on the floor and meditate. That's basically it. And when you're not meditating for those 10 hours, you don't do anything. You can't exercise or anything. There's just nothing. So it's pretty amazing in terms of processing. It's like putting it on fast forward. You're absolutely immersed just by being with yourself. And that was exactly what I needed. It was literally, I just felt so much better afterwards. It was a real, kind of shot in the arm, really. And, afterwards, I barely wanted to speak again. I felt nervous. Even I was turning my phone on. I felt so much better having disconnected like that. That was, it was a really powerful thing to do. If anyone is really struggling, or they've been through burnout, or they feel like they're going through it now, something like that, I would highly recommend. I mean, don't go straight into it. If you've never meditated before, then it's kind of analogous to, lying on your couch for many hours of the day and then deciding to run a marathon straight away. You need a bit of a run up, but it's it's a great practice to really shift something from a mindset perspective.
I love that analogy of the system reset, because it sounded like that's what you needed. Everything, all the circuits were blown. And you needed to rebuild, actually, not just reset, but rebuild from that point. Well, so let's talk about that. So, crisis has happened. You found there is choice. You've made some choice and done some things. For example, the meditation retreat. What then happened for you? Because I know you're in another business now, so it wasn't like that experience has said to you, Ollie, just go and, I don't know, work at the beach or something selling beers here in Ibiza. you are back in a startup, as we said at the beginning, quite differently set up. But so what really gave you that, I guess, the desire that I want to go and build something else again?
Yeah, I still had it in me. I think I'm still relatively young. I think I'm in my mid-40s. So, there's, part of it, I've got a young family. There's an imperative there as well. There's another driver. But also I still have ambition. I still want to do something. And after that meditation, sort of, like you say, rebuild, I took almost a full year off, and it did genuinely take me a long while to recover. I was allergic to my laptop. I was allergic to video calls. I felt genuinely, I had a big impact on my mental and physical well-being. But again, we were lucky. I took the family. We all decamped to a little paradise island in Thailand and spent, I was super cliche just saying it back, but lots of ice baths and Muay Thai training, meditation, and just family connection time. Just switched off from tech and just spending time doing stuff that I love, and with the people that I'm closest with, which was exactly what I needed. And that was like the longer term version of the immediate reboot, and that had a very positive impact on me, and I felt way better after that. And actually, again, quite a classic founder thing to do, but what happened with me got me very interested in the whole environment of burnout, the whole concept of it. And I started doing some research around it, and I hadn't realized, maybe naively, I hadn't realized how prevalent it is, and it's such a big issue. I'll just give a very high level stat. So the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization did a study. I think it came out in 2019. It's actually pre-COVID. And there's a $1 trillion impact to the global economy each year from mental ill health. And burnout is a major contributor to that. And, particularly it's in all different types of business verticals, but it's very common in leadership roles. It's very common in startup founders. And, if you just think about it logically, in a corporate environment, if you have a leader who burns out, average cost, I was talking to a health insurer earlier this week in relation to my new business, and the average cost to a health insurer is around €500,000 in the Eurozone when a leader burns out in a corporate.
Wow.
Because of, like lost productivity, poor decision making. There's the health implications, all the therapy and cost to get them better again. Oftentimes they don't come back. Or, if they do, they take, 6 months, a year off. And if they don't come back, they then have to be replaced. So, I kind of, when I dug into it, I just found that there's this massive problem that's completely underserved. So that sort of got me on the pathway to what I'm doing now. As a coach, you see people, it's really common, right? I mean, I speak to a lot of coaches now. What we built has a direct partnership approach with coaches, because that's where we've seen, coaches are almost on the front line of this. They're the ones who they're seeing leaders all the time. And oftentimes, even a coach, they might be coaching for leadership, strategy, execution, scalability, whatever it may be, but they're dealing with these professionals all the time. And what I find from, I must have spoken to easily 100 coaches in the past 6 weeks or so. And what we see time and time again is that coach might have a very particular function around, let's say, helping people scale up businesses. That's a common one. But so often it's the case that they help someone do the scale up, but what emerges is all of these issues around it. And oftentimes that does relate directly to burnout, whether it's co-founder strains, or whether it's, overwork, or whether it's something, maybe from a mental perspective. There's all these other components. So often the coaches who are there for a specific purpose, there's a holistic approach, because you're coaching an individual person rather than just like a particular way to execute a business strategy.
Right. So what you're building now, direct relevance to the experience you've had, and you're looking at, both an industry and industry at large in terms of what startup founders might be going through, and go, there is something here that can better support, better help during, those tough times. As you said, there's going to be the need for hard work and grit, et cetera, because building a business is not easy. but there's something that you're creating that can help.
Yeah, exactly right. So again, born out of experience. So first of all, my own experience of burnout was the kind of catalyst for it. Obviously, having lived it inside out, it gives you a very good insight into how it feels, and then realizing that you're part of this massive problem, or you've experienced something which is very commonly felt. That was an interesting moment. So the first thing we did, I built a little health and well-being team, and we did a few little programs for founders, and just explored the problem a bit more. We spoke to a lot of venture capital firms where, with VCs, they have portfolios of startups with founders, and this is commonly seen. Like I say, you see it in lots of leaders, but startup founders, it's particularly acute because it is a very stressful way to live your professional life. And what we found was, actually doing that kind of coaching, we were missing a data-driven approach. We didn't have data on the individuals, so we were very much relying on people self-reporting, telling us how they slept, how their feelings, what their emotions are, physiological signs, all of that kind of general overview, like a 360 degree of a person. And also, I mentioned I had a couple of professionals with me when I was doing my build, and particularly from the coaching side, having insight provided to me that, look, this is the pathway you're on is unsustainable. Not having any kind of data or insights around it, and again, I was so consumed with what I was doing, I just didn't really have a grip of what was going on. So we came to the realization that actually data on that individual, and particularly data that we could provide to coaches showing what was going on with the individuals in their cohorts or when they're doing one-to-ones, would be a really powerful thing to provide. And we spoke to a lot of coaches and validated that was something that would be of benefit. So that's really what we've built, and that's what we've brought to market now. So we have a data-driven platform whereby we look at the individual entirely. So we do things like on the physiological level, so looking at somebody's biomarkers. So we integrate with different wearables. If someone has a Whoop, or if someone has an Aura Ring or Fitbit, Apple, whatever it may be, 200 different types of wearables. We integrate all of that data. And also, if someone doesn't have a wearable, we have a very fancy piece of medtech where we use the inbuilt camera on a smartphone, any smartphone, and just a 30-second scan of the face. We're reading the blood as it pulsates beneath the skin. We can take medical grade biomarker data just from that scanning, which is obviously a pretty cool thing to do. So we take that physiological data, so everything from heart rate variability, which is very interesting in terms of tolerance for stress, blood pressure, breathing rate, all of these different markers. Pull that data in. We can also look at someone's genetic makeup. We can do DNA testing to see how you're wired from a neurological perspective. It's something I did on myself, which was genuinely transformational. So having neurosupplementation that's specifically designed for your own genetic makeup is been amazing for me.
I was going to ask if you're almost putting yourself through this, your own product, because here you are as a startup founder again, and what you might be noticing that's different.
Yeah, I've gone all in. So I'm using my own platform, which is a great way to learn what really works and what doesn't, and what to fix. I've also got myself a resilience coach who I see fortnightly. So I'm using the technology and I'm using it with a coach as well. So I'm getting the full experience, which is really useful. There's a genetic component. There is the biomarker component. And also with the function that we have an LLM component. So it's an agentic AI solution. So, I'm chatting with our AI called Presley. And from there, how am I showing up every day? What are my habits? What's my mood like? What are the things that are causing me stress? And all of that information is taken and put together again, with an AI component. And the coach can then see on the platform, in between those sessions, if I see my coach every 2 weeks, I'll see him once a month. They'll see, how I'm showing up every day, what my mood is, what my physiology is, what my mental priming is, what my readiness is. And it gives a very good full picture, rather than me just self-reporting like, I've had an okay week. This has happened, that's happened. They're showing up to the sessions with these full insights, which is a really interesting way to help someone at a deeper level.
Yeah. I love about this, Oli, is obviously we know as a coach, AI is here, and I see it as an enabler. And this is exactly that sort of enablement of how can I better support my clients through, the data you're sourcing, the AI component, and have an even richer kind of conversation. I'm still a coach, and I've just got access to more insight, more knowledge. That it's, but as I say, it might be hard for someone to actually put words to when you meet up in a session. How are you doing? Yeah, things have been okay. And of course, we have ways to get much deeper into that. But I'm just getting a sense of this dashboard would give you such clarity in terms of, how you feel before stepping up in front of an investor presentation or a client presentation. So what's going on for you? And then, okay, what can we work on in that? What breathing technique, for example, might we want to bring in? What meditation approach might be required? What mindset shift might we want to talk about in that moment to prepare you for what your body's actually going through? So I think it's really exciting.
That's very well put, Richard. Thank you. So yeah, we played that back beautifully. And the big message from us is, AI is here, right? And that, obviously there's a scary element to that. People are worried about being replaced. The whole purpose of what we created, this is like a co-pilot for the coach. It's an amplification of your skills as a coach. It's 100% not about taking the coach out. We're not building this agentic AI solution to do the coach's job. One thing that I found is, data is great, right? Data is really helpful, can give you a lot of insight. And the direction of travel is very data oriented, and the kind of people that we are building this for, startup founders, business leaders, everybody is data driven. If you're going to run a business, you need to have that approach. So having data on the individual is very, very helpful. But at the same time, it does come down to someone's personality. It comes down to, how they're showing up, the other things going on in their life. So replacing a coach with an LLM and data is not what we're about at all. That's not something which I believe in. I think it's a combination that the power comes from empowering the coach with those data-driven insights rather than just showing up with it. And those two things together, the combination, is what really has the amplification and the impact.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get involved and trial it with my own clients when the time is right. And Oli, just as we're sort of coming kind of to a close now, and there's been so much wisdom in here that you've shared, your story, your experiences, which I know is going to land so powerfully with people listening. What question do you think leaders now, and it might be more focused on startup leaders, scale up leaders, what questions do they need to be asking themselves right now, would you say?
There's one big one that comes to mind, and it's something that I've reflected on a lot myself. And I would urge leaders or anyone who's building a company, leading a company, ask yourself honestly what kind of culture you're building in your business, and is it one that you're proud of? I think, for me, that was the biggest lesson. Obviously, the way I approached it, the burnout that I had a big impact on me, but probably my biggest regret is looking back and seeing how we were leading a business and how others were showing up because of how we were showing up. It's not something that I'm proud of. And I think it's very easy to get swept away in, this is my business, this is what we're delivering, this is the big goal and the vision. And all of that stuff is important. You have to be passionate about it. But I think creating a culture where you're almost embedding this kind of feeling of like burnout because you showing up in that particular way is just giving an example to others. I really think that needs some examination. And, I think it's worth, as a leader, really having an honest look at yourself and making sure you're proud of what you're building.
Love that. You say culture eats strategy for breakfast, and it's true, right? You've lived it, you've experienced it, and I see it and hear it time and time again. And I totally agree with you. I think leaders can go way deeper into the culture they are creating through every little thing that you're doing. Starts to build culture. That's my belief.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, again, looking back, I was so cynical about culture previously. I think having come up in that corporate environment and, hearing about corporate culture, there can be so much BS about it, right? This huge, multinational conglomerate investment bank and people talking about the culture and, there's so much rubbish around it. But the reality is, particularly in a smaller business, that culture is critical. And, like you say, if there is a really good culture, it does completely knock strategy out of the park. You pull together and have the right approach. So that's a lesson that I learned the hard way.
Well, there we go. And Oli, I really appreciate you joining today and sharing all those lessons, because that's it. This is where our experience comes out of those lessons. This is the point of this series, Mojo Under Fire. And you certainly were under fire. Your Mojo was under fire, and you've come out so much stronger and creating an exciting new product as well. So excited to see that. Oli Johnson, thank you for joining today.
Total pleasure. Thank you, Richard. Appreciate the invite.